we are here with Abbe Greenberg and Maggie Sarachek. That's how you pronounce it?
That is how I pronounce it.
Wonderful. Also known as Abs and Mags, also known as the Anxiety Sisters. And this is going to be such an incredible conversation. I really hope we have enough time to talk about everything that I want to ask you two about. But the first thing I want to ask you, and this is something that I ask our guests a lot, but I think for you two in particular, I wanted to know the answer to this question. So first thing in the morning, because I need glasses to read my phone, I forego the glasses and meditate before I reach for my phone. What is it that you guys do first thing in the morning that kind of sets you up for the day you're going to have? Abbe, we'll start with you.
I would say 3 or 4 7/8 breaths. So
Okay.
I breathe in for 4, I hold it for 7, I breathe out for 8. I do that 3 or 4 times, and that really sets my system up. It's very similar to meditation.
Yeah. And what about you, Maggie?
Well, if I'm being completely honest, which I really believe in being, I am not a first thing in the morning person. I am like, let me get out of bed. Let me get something to eat and some coffee, and the next half hour is just thinking about what I have to do to get 2 kids out of the house. But I am not one of those people that has a great morning routine that I think everyone should be doing. I'm usually saying, like, are there clean clothes?
Mm-hmm.
All
I
that.
appreciate that.
I was to say, I appreciate that too. I appreciate that honesty. I am somebody that's good for me to have the morning routine, but a lot of people need exactly what you just described in order to begin their routine, which comes a little bit later for them in the
In
morning.
all fairness, Mags, as soon as you get the kids off to school, then you do your walk.
Then I do my morning routine,
Yeah.
but I have to say that my first thing in the morning is pretty chaotic.
Right.
You
So
know.
then you kind of, the ritual that you engage in kind of calms your system down after that.
Yeah, I'm so tired first thing in the morning that I don't even feel that anxious. I just know it's
Okay.
like a lot of chaos going on.
Right.
It's like a
Okay.
mother's survival guide.
Yeah,
Like, I need a half an hour to assess what I need.
it's true. How
Uh-huh.
old are your kids, Maggie?
Well, now they're 15 and 18, so now
That's still a lot.
they're a little bit older. It's
Yeah.
more for me that they wear uniforms to school, and that's like my kryptonite kind of, because they're never clean, I don't have enough of them, the
Right.
whole
Yeah.
thing is we don't have matching socks,
Right.
that is me. I wish it wasn't, but it is. It's one of those acceptance things.
That's awesome. My kids went to a uniform school too, and I remember all of that.
Hmm.
Thank you both for that. And I am Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, honey. So today we are talking to Abbe Greenberg, MCIS, and Maggie Sarachek, MSW. They are trained counselors, mental health advocates, researchers, educators, writers, and longtime anxiety sufferers. In 2017, they launched their online community, which now includes more than 200,000 people in 200 plus countries and territories. Together, the Anxiety Sisters write an award-winning blog and host a monthly podcast called The Spin Cycle, which is just the best name. I love that name. Anyway, we'll get back into that. But having learned to live happily with anxiety, they spend their time coaching anxiety sufferers and conducting workshops and retreats. So welcome, Abs and Mags, to the show. So happy to have you here officially. And the first thing I want to ask you too is, how do you identify?
She, her.
Same.
Okay, great.
But for
And
anxiety, if you don't mind, for Anxiety Sisters, our
yes,
community, we call ourselves Anxiety Sisters because we feel like sisters and we fight like sisters. But we really are for anyone of any gender identification, and anyone who experiences anxiety, and we tend to say like anxiety community is not that catchy, so we are still the Anxiety Sisters, but that encompasses anyone and everyone.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. And it's actually one of the things that I learned during our first talk was that this was not just for people who identify as women. This is really for everyone because not everyone in the world has this, but everyone has the potential to, right, honey?
The first person I sent this book to was a man, was a friend of mine. And I felt it was important. And I addressed that when I sent it to him. I said, don't get hung up on this. This is about identifying how you feel and what your experience is versus attaching any sort of gender to it. So
a full third of our community identifies as male.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I believe it doesn't discriminate. Anxiety, right?
And what's funny is a lot of our men will say, I like calling myself an anxiety sister.
Well, it does feel like a very familial bond, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea is that nobody should feel alone, that we're all in this together.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
I agree.
Which is the whole reason for this podcast. So, Anxiety Sisters Survival Guide. How You Can Become More Hopeful, Connected, and Happy is the name of your incredible book. You see, I have Post-its in it. I have been reading and marking. You have heard by now, as a faithful listener to the podcast, on my nightstand where I read from this book. And if you listen to that episode, you know that I had a hard time choosing what to read for those 10 minutes. But I did choose 3 of my favorite sections. I love that book. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about me because it's relevant. I have never in my life read a self-help book or anything that might fall under the category of health and wellness. I've just never felt the need to. I found them to be pretty boring. And I'm not a seeker in that way. I'm a seeker in other ways, but not in that way. Lately, I only read memoir, and I'll read the occasional novel. There was a time when that was reversed. But I started flipping through your book when I first got it, and I was like, oh, good, illustrations. This could be interesting. And then I started reading parts of it out loud to Scotty, and then I was hooked. And the other thing that I share it with you is that, and I shared this on my nightstand too, is I've never identified as an anxious person. I'm not someone who ruminates on things. I'm rarely aware of how people are perceiving me, nor do I really care. There aren't a lot of things that I won't do because I'm afraid to do or try them. But your book blew my mind, and it's giving me an entirely new experience with anxiety. Some of those quotes could have been mine in your book, and it shocked me. So I want to say thank you for that, first of all. And then I want to hear, starting with Maggie, how did you guys become Abs and Mags? How did this happen? This amazing, wonderful union. How did you become sisters? And tell me about that journey.
Well, we met in college. We went to the University of Pennsylvania. And Abby always says that we both had anxious looks on our face. But so we were drawn together, and that, when everyone else was rushing sororities, we were forming a sorority of our own, anxiety sorority, with the toughest initiation of any.
Amazing.
Yeah, yes. But we stayed, very close friends after college and as we went into our 20s. And I would say that we both started to experience more symptoms that really impacted our functioning. I think we both now realize we've both had anxiety since we were little girls, but we started in our 20s to really see our functioning being impacted. And I always say that we had this decade, both of us as best friends, of the is, where we sort of knew something was wrong and we weren't functioning well, but we couldn't quite figure out what it was. So we went to the nutritionist and the neurologist and the gastroenterologist and the past life regressionist and the hypnotist and the therapist and the psychiatrist. Name an ist who would take our money, and we were there. trying to sort of find some sort of answers. And so what we realized, I think at some point was when we both really understood that we had anxiety, what we realized was that what helped us the most was each other, was having someone to call and someone to completely support you and like talk each other off a ledge, so to speak.
But without
That
judgment. Without
not
judgment.
no judgment, no, and to sort of just be the calm voice and the loving voice and the compassionate voice. And so that's really what helped the two of us the most. And that was kind of the start of our journey through anxiety. And we really wanted to be able to extend that to other people.
Oh, that's beautiful. I know people will do the math and try to figure out how old you are, but
54.
How long has this friendship been?
We're 54.
You're 54. Wow. So what is that? Is that 30 years? No, longer.
More, 35.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
I haven't taken math since high school, so I really have no idea. But yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for that. And I love the idea that community is the antidote for shame. And so finding each other and then being able to share that, it's just such a relief. And I think that's with anything. My kid went to a school for dyslexic kids because he had really severe dyslexia. For a couple of years, he went to that school, and it was enough to build his confidence because he was in a community full of people who experienced academia the same way that he did. And then he was able to go on to the high school that he wanted to go on and do really well there. Someone said that at the 8th grade graduation, that community is the antidote for shame.
And I bet even as a parent, because I have had similar experience as a parent, you walk in and the teachers and the other parents understand sort of what you've been through with your child and what your child's going through. And it's like, oh, I have a community too.
Yes. Yes.
And
Thank you.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, it's so true. Abbe, I told you guys I wanted to hear your only one in the room story with anxiety before we started. And you mentioned that you had one kind of right off the top of your head. Would you mind telling us that now?
No, I'd be happy to. The very first time I ever did what's called in the clinical literature dissociation, when I dissociated or depersonalized, it sort of means that you kind of leave your body and you look down at yourself and say, hey, why am I not in my own body? It's a very freaky feeling to have. Maggie and I call it floating because it's such an awful experience and yet so common to the anxiety experience that we decided that we would give it a new name that would be less threatening. And then once we did that and talked about it, then scores of people were saying, oh, I've been doing that too. I didn't know it was a thing.
Yes.
For me, the first time that happened, I was 40 and I was having a panic attack. And I got a lot of cardiac symptoms with my panic attacks and often went to the emergency room for them. And I did go this particular time as well. But this one had a new symptom, and that was that I was trying to catch my breath, and suddenly I heard my own voice say, I may be dying. But I heard the voice as if someone next to me was saying it. And then I opened my eyes and I looked down and I saw myself on the floor, rocking in panic. And I thought, there isn't, I have lost it or I'm on my way to a better place because there's nobody else in the world who's ever experienced this. It's over.
Yeah.
And I definitely felt so incredibly alone and so frightened.
I would imagine, that's happened to me as well. Someone described it once as like, you're there, but you've gone to the Chicago office. Like your body is there and you've just left for that. So sometimes you don't even know what's actually going on when you come back into your body. Like, I don't remember what happened. And that's usually for me with trauma. But certainly it could happen with anxiety. And tell me, how did you did you go to Maggie and say this happened to me, or did you go to someone else
Well,
and say that?
I called an ambulance because I really thought that something terrible.
Yeah, no, I mean afterward. How did you find out that you weren't alone with that?
Oh, yeah, I called Maggie from the emergency room.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which I did many times.
Yes.
And I was crying and I was a wreck. And I said to her, they're doing all the tests for my heart, but you're not going to believe what happened to me. And I told her, and she said, that happens to me. It's called depersonalization, and it's actually started because Maggie has a lot of clinical background, counseling background.
Yes.
So she was able to really explain to me what it was. I had not heard of it.
Wow. And then Maggie, you had mentioned, and I want to get to your only one in the room story, but you had mentioned that you both realized that you were experiencing anxiety symptoms as children. Is that right? Can you just tell me a few of those, and how you kind of figured it out? Maggie, you could start. Yeah.
Sure. I experienced a lot of separation anxiety as a child. And so, it would even be things like, going to summer camp. We'd go to sleepaway camp, and I was having a really good time and really enjoyed it and wanted to be there. But I'd cry every morning. I'd get this feeling in my chest every single morning and start to cry. And years later, I ran into the nurse from my camp that I went to for many years. And she said, yeah, it was always so strange because, you weren't one of those kids that was struggling in terms of even making friends. And you weren't one of those kids that it happened for 2 or 3 days. She's like, it happened every day for the entire session of camp. And she said, I never could figure it out. What happened to you every morning?
Right. But that was your anxiety.
It was my separation.
Your body
anxiety.
telling you. Yeah.
Yeah. That was
this
just
isn't okay.
Yeah. It was anxiety. I felt this heaviness on my chest.
Yeah.
But had no idea what that meant.
Right.
And of course, since I was like 8 or 9 or 10, I didn't think it meant a heart attack. I just thought,
right. Yeah.
I don't know what this means. I don't understand. So I would cry.
Wow. And what about you, Abbe?
Well, I definitely was experiencing anxiety. My first memory of it would be when I was around 5 years old. I had a lot of rituals. I was very afraid of being in the car. For some reason, I developed a bit of a fear around driving, not my driving, but my parents' driving. So I would have this ritual where I would have to go out before my parents came to the garage. I'd have to go in the garage and I'd have to touch the tire 3 times. And then I'd do it for each tire because that would mean the tire would be safe and it wouldn't blow out.
Right.
And, and I remember this as an adult. I was not diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, which is the anxiety disorder where you have obsessions and then rituals or compulsions to soothe yourself from those obsessive thoughts. I was not diagnosed till I was 46.
Oh, wow.
So I went through more than 40 years of experiencing obsessive compulsive disorder in many different ways.
Man.
But I can remember it starting when I was 5 years old. And I was too ashamed to tell anyone. I never told my parents and never told a soul until Maggie.
Wow. I want to, I know that we're talking about anxiety as an adult. We're adults talking about it right now. But I just think it's fascinating that there are things that we can look out for in our children where we could see them and see that these things are coming up and to see how then we can be helpful to them or be comforting to them or let them know that they're not alone. Oh, this might have a name. This might not just be something weird that you do. This might actually have a name and it's okay. And then there's help that we can give you around it that might help you, or coping mechanisms or tools.
I think a lot of I think a lot
of go ahead.
I think a lot of parents miss something that I missed as a parent. And that is kids who need constant reassurance. That they leave the car, not even just for school, and say, are you sure you'll be okay? Promise me nothing will happen to you. That kind of constant reassurance is a big sign of anxiety, and other kids who there's this other piece that people feel emotional contagion, they call it, and these are signs of OCD really, but it's like this idea that you can catch something, but catch a personality trait from someone else. Like, oh, if I share their food, will I get like that? Or if I'm with them so much, will I start to get this personality trait? And I don't mean in the way we all say, like, you end up sort of like the people you're with. I mean, literally, like, catch it like you catch a cold.
Right.
And so there are things that happen with anxiety with kids that even someone who had a lot of training, as someone who had a lot of training, I missed. I didn't know what that was. Someone saying to me, promise me this, promise me that, promise me this, all around safety.
Right.
And I missed it with mine too. Not that particular thing, but I missed the isolation. One of my children in high school started really isolating himself in his room and not wanting to be with his friends anymore and this and that. And I just thought, oh, he's really into his computer. And, Maggie is the one who pointed out to me and said, you need to watch that. Because that's, that social anxiety happening. And there's some things you have to look at. And she was right. And I needed to look into it. I missed it myself. And I'm, trained.
How do you intervene
as parents, we do. We miss what's right under our nose.
But how, because that's so much of being a teenager, right? Teenagers always want their space. They never want to be out with the family or they just want to be alone. So what's the intervention for that when you suspect? Or what did you do, Abbe?
Well, I first, started to try to find out what was happening behind that closed door because, he was in that room alone a lot and so I had to find out what was going on with him. And he really was suffering. I mean, he had depression. And so I had to, get him to talk to me. And I was a professor of communication at the time at a university where I had been for 13 years. I took a leave right away because I saw, I need to be home with him. I need to be talking with him and seeing what's going on. And, I need to be helping him start to emerge from this.
Wow.
I have to help him walk out of this a bit.
How wonderful that you could do that.
Well,
that you could do that
so
for
lucky.
him.
It's also that he wasn't just isolating from his parents. He was isolating from friends. Mm-hmm. So that's where, a lot of teenagers isolate from their parents, and that may be a normal part of their development, depending on the teenager and the isolation. But it's like when they're isolating from everyone that you start to notice, wow.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then, Maggie, I just want to go back to your only one story.
Sure. There's so many, but I think that what I really started to develop such severe phobias, particularly around transportation, other things too, but planes, trains, cars, elevators. And I lived on the 16th floor of my building in New York City. Oh, no. And so it got to the point where it became hard for me to leave the house. And I so much remember one day just, taking a shower, and I would get really nauseous in the morning and feel really, really sick. And I was just like, okay, I just got to get in the shower, got to get my hair, just in a ponytail, doesn't even need to be dried, and get out the door. And I could not do it. I remember looking at myself in the mirror, and I could not get out the door. Just couldn't do it. Every time I would step near that door, I would be overcome with nausea, because anxiety can also be so physical. So I would just be overcome, run to the bathroom, dry heave, try to get back to the door. And I couldn't make it out. Could not make it outside. And I just thought, am I going to spend the rest of my life pretty much in this apartment. That's what I kind of thought. Like, I'm going to spend the rest of my life kind of in this apartment, and I'm in New York City, so everything is delivered. You know, there's Chinese food
Right.
on the street, and you know, and I that's just what I assumed. I assumed like that might be it.
You were just resigning yourself to a life alone in your place.
You know, I was married I was already married.
Right. Yeah.
And I was resigning myself to the idea that I wouldn't get out much. I didn't totally understand what it was that was stopping me so much. But I remember trying to think like, well, what are all the things I can do in my apartment? You know, like, so if I need this, can I get it? If I need that, can I get it? You know, and that was like a real moment where I was like, I didn't know anyone else who lived like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much the same checklist that most of us probably went through for the pandemic, but for a much different reason.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because we're like, oh my God, we're going to be inside for 2 weeks, 2 months, a year. What can we, but for you, it was like, because I'm not able to get out there.
Yeah.
And other people can. I need to figure out how to be okay in here for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought I guess I'm not going to have children. You know, most of my life will be here, around here, at least.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
literally that was my thought, because I just couldn't imagine being able to get out with how I felt.
Oh, thank you both for those stories. It's, you know, and when I think about anxiety, I think about the stigma that surrounds it, and the dear girlfriends who struggle to articulate what they're experiencing, and you know, they're afraid of the judgment, or being, and you say this so beautifully in your book over and over again, being thought of as weak, being thought of as less than, because there's this, and I want to talk about that. I'm going to kind of go through some of my favorite points in the book, and then either one of you can feel free to jump in and discuss. The first thing that really stood out to me, because it has always felt like someone shoved me when someone has said this to me, which is just relax. I love it. Both of you nodded exactly the same way.
Never in the history of
tell me why that's a bad thing to say.
Anyone ever relaxed by being told to relax?
Right.
It's just not something that can happen. And it's very, you know, Mags and I, it occurs to us that being told just relax, it's actually very shaming.
Yes.
It's very
thank
judging,
you.
because it's telling you, well, you know, you need to get it together. You obviously are at fault here. You're not doing it right. You're not getting with the program. You need to do that. And, you know, as anxiety sufferers, we're already filled with self-blame a lot of the time, and filled with shame. And that's just not helpful. It's not helpful to be reshamed on top of what we already are feeling. And Mags and I repeat this nonstop, day and night, over and over and over again to people all around the world. Anxiety is a disorder. It's not a decision. You are not weak. You do not have a moral failing. It's not a personality trait. You're not undisciplined. You're not flaky. You're unreliable. None of those things. You have a disorder. It's a condition. And we always talk about the fact that if you had a broken leg and you were wearing a cast, people would trip all over themselves to help you, you know, open a door for you, to bring you casserole so you don't have to cook yourself dinner. And if they would never dream of expecting you to take the stairs because, you know, you broke a leg.
Right.
But anxiety, because it's in our brain, so it's invisible to everyone. Yeah, they're going to expect you to still go pick up your kid from soccer practice. And by the way, their kid too. And, oh yeah, you're going to bake those brownies for the bake sale the next day. And in other words, there's not going to be that same, oh, let me get you a casserole so that you don't have to cook tonight. That doesn't happen for anxiety.
Right. You know, I'm having, what is it called when you realize something in a moment? Like a revelation?
Yeah, that's what Oprah calls it. Moments, yeah.
Where, because, you know, I'm 13 years sober. I think we talked about that, but if we didn't, I am. And
we listened to your moth story too.
Oh, okay. Okay. So part of my deal was, I needed to take pills. That was my drug of choice, in order to show up for my life. And I realized that all that stuff you just described, Abby, the baking brownies, the picking their kids up from soccer practice, the showing up perfect, which I did. I needed something to help me do that. And I was probably medicating my own anxiety without realizing that it had a name. And that's what I was doing. Because like I said, I've never identified as an anxious person. So it didn't even occur to me that what I was experiencing, the fear, the whatever it was that I would need fortification for, in order to show up. And I was like, you're welcome. I'm showing up. So if I have to take this and this in order to do it, then so be it. But, my doctors weren't prescribing those pills. They were sleeping pills. They weren't prescribing them to me so that I could use them throughout the day in small amounts to fortify myself to go do things. And, but yeah, when you just said that just really like it clicked for me. So thank you for that. One more question. Should we consider that everyone might have an anxiety disorder? Like, is there anybody we can say just relax to without knowing what's going on with them? We can't, right? It's just not a good thing to say to anyone.
Well, it's not a productive thing or a helpful thing. And sometimes it's not a compassionate thing to say.
Right.
So it's not that it never slips out of my mouth, right? We say it to people sometimes. It slips out to my kids or
usually our children or
our children or our husband.
Yeah.
So, we're all just trying the best we can and we say things. It's just that if someone really is having a problem with anxiety, it's not going to be helpful and it's going to sort of feel dismissive.
I wanted to talk about the second brain. This was fascinating to me. So I read it, and then I called my dad, Dr. Ronald Cathcart, who is an HIV AIDS doctor in Melbourne, Florida, a long-time vegan or plant-based eater. He's actually not vegan because he wears leather. Plant-based eater, and just very, very health aware and preventive care aware. And he is the only other person in the world, and I actually hadn't heard you two talk about it. I read about it, but he talked about that second brain. He talks about it all the time. And in fact, there's someone that's in Scott and I's life. My dad was here visiting, and they were saying that they felt like their head was too loud. They didn't really have the words to articulate it. So he put them on a brown rice and beans diet for a week because it's good for the gut microbiome and blah, blah, blah. And he said, that serotonin is down there. You need to get it up there, and this will help. And they said 2 days later, they felt great. Like the noise in their head was gone. So I wanted you to talk to me about the second brain. And if people are listening, they're like, what second brain you're talking about?
So we have the brain everyone knows about and talks about. That's the one in the penthouse suite right here on top of our heads.
Yes.
And that's part of the central nervous system, or the CNS. And then we have what's called the enteric nervous system, or the ENS, and that's located in our guts. That's in our bellies, and that's where our gut biome is. And our gut biome really is the future of medicine. There's a relatively new field right now called neurogastroenterology, which really focuses on the gut-brain connection. In other words, the connection between your second brain in your belly and your first brain in your head, and they are connected by the vagus nerve, which runs all the way down your whole body into your gut. And it's two-way information that travels along that vagus nerve. So when you say you want to get your serotonin up there, you're right. You want to make sure that what's the 95% of your serotonin that's being produced in your gut is becoming accessible to the cells in your brain on top of your head. So you are right in that there actually has to be good communication on your vagus nerve. And the makeup of your gut biome really, it affects that communication. So if you have, let's just say, a bacteria that's not good for the gut biome, like H. pylori is one type of bacteria it's kind of toxic. You don't want it. I mean, if they find it in your biome, they get rid of it with antibiotics. That can cause there to be a disruption in your serotonin. So, neurogastroenterologists are really studying how what we eat now affects our brain and mental health because of that connection with the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
So that's why they're calling it our second brain. If you roll out your stomach, it's the size of a badminton court.
Who knew?
So it has as many neurons as your central nervous system does.
Wow.
It's a really powerful brain, and it's funny. There were creatures, back long before human beings were around. There were creatures. The only thing that they did was eat and digest. That was their whole, but that was considered a brain. So human beings are sophisticated in the sense that we have two brains. We have a brain that's sort of the head honcho, and then we have a brain that's in charge of basically just our digestive process. So I don't think your father is wrong in putting so much emphasis on what we put in our guts, because that really is the seat of our health. It's the seat of our immune system. It's the seat of our serotonin production. And there's so much they don't yet know. But there's a study that has fascinated me out of Canada, out of McGill University in Canada. Dr. Stephen Collins transplanted mice, anxious mice, with calm mice. He switched their biomes. He did a fecal transplant, which, don't grimace, it is the wave of the future.
Yeah.
But he swapped the biomes, and the anxious mice became calm, and the calm mice became anxious. So, I mean, I find that stuff incredibly fascinating. There's a fantastic book out there called The Second Brain by, I think his name is Emran Mayer. It's fantastic. That really goes into detail about that connection.
Well, thank you. That was a great explanation. Thank you for that. And I also just want to say that my dad was not advocating don't ever take medication if you've been diagnosed with something and the medication is productive and effective. He was just saying this, like this would be something to try.
Yes.
To help. So
we've heard so much anecdotal evidence about that. I mean, we have heard so many people who have changed their diets, done things like added kimchi and kombucha and fermented foods, which are so healthy for the biome, and yogurt that contains the probiotic strains, and have really experienced a lot of success with it. I have tried those things myself, and it didn't change anything for me, but it doesn't mean that I don't believe in it. I just think there's a lot more to learn. It's a really new and exciting field.
That is exciting. Neurogastroenterologist.
Yep.
Yeah, they're doing a lot with Parkinson's and the gut biome. I mean, a lot of different kinds of diseases that are surprising.
Yeah, can I tell you something interesting about Parkinson's? They now know that they can detect changes in the gut biome 20 years before you'll see any neurological symptoms of Parkinson's.
Wow. That's amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
And how exciting.
It is exciting because that is, your father, who is obviously a doctor and so well informed. We got, it's great because very few doctors really know to say to people, I mean, it's what you eat. It's the air you breathe. It's like they've done gut biomes of, they did a study, I think in Norway, of families that had dishwashers, families that didn't have dishwashers. And because, the idea that we all clean in a frenzy. And they actually saw that the kids whose families did not have dishwashers had a more diverse, healthier gut biome.
Wow.
I mean, just, it's like kids who travel the world and play in dirt in different places end up with healthier gut biomes. There's so much, is all I'm trying to say, that has to do with the gut biome. But it's amazing that your dad, who's a doctor, has taken this on. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. He's smiling right now as he listens to this.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
A very smart man.
Very smart. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. He'll send you a check.
Well, maybe he can tell me how to fix my biome because I can use some work there too.
He will.
He'll actually want a check from you guys.
And he'll want to tell you how to fix your biome too. I want to move on to the next thing because I have two more things that I really wanted to talk about. There's a lot. I have a lot of notes here. We're not going to get to all of it, but I wanted to talk about, I loved your section on grief. That just was so profound to me. That you wrote that as a society, we have so many restrictions on bereavement. And I wanted you to just talk a little bit about the connection. Just one thing you said in there, you had a quote from a woman who had to take a week off from work because she had suffered a loss. Someone that had been, or, her pet that had been with her for 20 years. It was like or whatever. It was a very long relationship. Anyway, I'm going to get stuck on that. But basically she had suffered this loss. She was heartbroken, and she had to call in sick from work because she was embarrassed to tell them the real reason why she needed that time off. And you guys talk about we can only grieve for immediate family. Right. And even then there's a time limit, 3 days. So yeah, talk to me about the connection between grief and loss and anxiety.
Well, our friend Clara Bidwell Smith, loves to say that she has a book called, Anxiety is the Missing Stage of Grief. And the two of us have definitely found that to be true. In my own, life, my anxiety became really intense. My panic attacks about 6 months after my father passed away. And there was a major shift. And Claire says that's pretty common 6 to 18 months after we lose someone important to us. Anxiety really revs up. The panic attacks really start. And we just want to say that it's not only, that was my father, but it can be a pet, and it can be a best friend. It can be just a friend. It can be anybody. I think, we tend to, in this society, say like, oh, if it's not your partner or your parents or your child, that person can't really matter to you, which is, of course, insane and ridiculous.
Right.
Because we can have so many meaningful relationships, and there's just no space for them. There's no space to talk about it when we have that kind of grief. It's like part of the worst thing that we can do is sort of not recognize that someone's in grief. Someone told us recently their religious leader passed away, and they're in tremendous grief. And so that's something that happens. So people feel somewhat invisible in grief, I think, know?
Yeah. Western culture really has done a lousy job helping us with this because, like I said, you get 3 days bereavement leave, and that's for your father or your mother or your son. I mean, that's for what they consider a major loss.
Right.
Never mind.
And then talk to me about Eastern culture. And how
Eastern culture, I think, does better because in Eastern cultures, or at least in Indian culture, and in some of the Asian cultures, they really they treat death as a part of life and as something that can be talked about, and they have a lot of rituals, and they don't only go for 3 days. I mean, I was reading about one family. I wish I knew it. It was in an Asian state, and I can't remember where, but they do a whole year of grieving for a family member. And I think the family member was a grandparent who died of old age. It wasn't even like it was a tragic death, but yet the amount of space that family and that community held for that grief, for that family, and for the community in general. I thought that would go a long way in easing Western culture's anxiety around grief if we had more space to process it and to do it as a community. I mean, I noticed here, one thing that Mags and I do on our Facebook page is we ask people about, like, people will mention that they've lost someone, and we say, please tell us about that person. Well, that is not a typical thing in Western culture. We don't want to talk about the person who died because, what if we trigger something, or, but people want to continue their relationships with their loved ones even after they're gone. I mean, I lost my grandmother, who was my person in this world, and I lost her 10 years ago, and there's not a day where she's not part of my life. Even though she's not in the world with us, she is part of my life. And I just think that we need to make room for that. We need to make room for the relationships to continue.
I love that. Oh, no, go ahead, Maggie.
Oh, no. We also know from a lot of research that when people have traumatic losses, and it doesn't have to be a child or a partner, it could be a friend, but when they have anything that is a traumatic loss to them, they often need to tell people their loss story. Like what happened? What happened in the hospital, or what happened in the accident? And they need to get that out. And people tend to say, "Oh, don't pay attention to the end." You know what I mean? Like, remember the person for how they were. But, but really that person needs to tell that loss story. That is a major part of helping them to process what happened in that grief.
Yeah. And then, and loss can also be a home
or
a divorce, or a marriage, rather. You're grieving the loss of your marriage.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Your kids growing up and going to college, or wherever they might go, but kids leaving the house, all those things fall under the category of loss. And those are all subjects that we, in the United States anyway, are uncomfortable giving too much space.
Yes.
We don't want to talk about that for very long, unless it's over drinks in the bar. And then by the time we wake up tomorrow, you should be over this because we did that.
Right. There's a lot of we did that rather than sort of understanding that you have to keep doing it and doing it. I know someone who actually, they were moving, and they moved within their same town, but they moved with their children in their same town. And they made a book about their old house and the whole moving, right? They had like drawings and memories in the different rooms and this and that. And, this person was saying that one of their children, probably she had to read that book every night with her for 8, 9, 10 months. It was like, there was so much, that child had so much grief over leaving that house.
And so much support.
Yes. Her mom was a therapist, but the mother kind of said, like, to me one day, she was like, part of me is like, oh, we're living in such a nicer house now and this and that. And she's like, and of course, part of her realized that didn't matter. It was that grief. I mean, they just spend so much time on that.
And I just want to point out that, this pandemic has been filled with loss for all of us, and not just loss. We've all lost people to death. I mean, most of us have at some point or another. It's someone we know or a friend of a friend. I lost a family member. We've all lost people, but it's not just that. It's also the loss of certain rituals and certain freedoms that we had and certain ways of life that, in other words, there's a lot of loss because of the pandemic. And so, I just wanted to point that out if you're listening, that if you're feeling a lot of loss right now, you are completely in the majority, because our community has almost doubled since the pandemic started because of the amount of loss and isolation people are feeling.
I would imagine so. Thank you for that. I have a friend who is also a guest who is, she deals with bereavement in her spiritual community. And she said she's never taken so many calls as in the start of the pandemic, and had to tend to so many people, including pets, including these things that just hadn't come to her before. The losses felt more acute. To people, especially when they didn't have people around them to share them with.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Last thing I wanted to talk about was shame. And you have a quote in here. It's a really beautiful, just 2 pages on shame. And then the quote is, at my first checkup after the baby was born, I told my OBGYN about my anxiety. I told him about the panic attacks and lack of sleep making it so much worse. He kind of shrugged and said it's normal to feel hormonal, that's in quotes, and that the good news was I was cleared to have sex. Can I just tell you, that was my exact same experience. I had gone in for that 6-week checkup. He's like, the good news is you can have sex again. I said, something's off. I didn't know anything about postpartum. I didn't know anything about any of that, but I knew that something was off, and I told him I wasn't sleeping, and he just kind of shrugged it off. And so it told me where to put that. This is not something I can talk about. I must accept whatever he gives me and move through it like that. and no one else needs to know, because I've gone to my medical professional, the person who deals with this every day, and he shrugged it off. So I wanted you to just talk to me a little bit about that.
Mine did too. I remember I had severe postpartum depression after the birth of my son, and 6 weeks postpartum, I went to my doctor, whom I really loved, and I still do. He was a great doctor and a great guy.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, I am crying all the time. It makes no sense, and I'm just like, I don't feel connected to the baby, and I'm anxious. I'm like, I feel like I can't sit still. I can't get comfortable. I don't know what's wrong with me. And he said, oh, you're the funniest person I know. It's just the baby blues. You're going to be just fine. Now go out and get yourself something sexy, because you and your husband can get back at it.
Wow. Yes. Yes.
And all I thought to myself is, I'm supposed to get sexy right now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. It is mine. I still love my OBGYN, but very similar experience. Good guy. Really bad, not just advice, but, the suggestions for going forward. I was not considered in that. And then everything that is known about that condition was also not considered.
Right.
Yeah. And then, so just some closing thoughts from either of you about shame and anxiety.
We always talk about... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maggie.
Well, I think that one of the things that I've seen is that people say, well, the mental health stigma is lessening, and it certainly is in certain ways. Like, people might feel comfortable saying I have anxiety or I have depression or whatever else. But the thing is, the way the stigma is not changing so much is that people are less happy to understand how it will affect what you can do and perhaps their lives. So, it's like, oh, okay, you have anxiety, but you're still going to show up at my event, right? Or
yes.
You're still going to do this, or you're still going to do that. And a lot of people find that when they say, like, I don't think I could make it, or I can't do that, people are a lot less understanding. Because it's still, even though they'll say, like, I understand, it's still thought of as it's your choice. Like, you could do it if you really wanted to.
Right. They have, like, this much more tolerance because you told them.
Yes.
Because you gave it a name, but not that's the extent of it. Okay, now I know you have anxiety, but like you said, the party's at 2.
Yes.
What are you bringing?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Boy. Yeah.
Also,
and then that...
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Mags and I, when we talk about shame, we define it as feeling sort of outside of your tribe, right? You're feeling other or alone. You're feeling like the only one in the room.
Yeah.
And what I just want to say is that you're not the only one in the room. The anxiety, sisterhood / brotherhood / otherhood, whatever you want to call it, our community is, it's 289 million people in this world have anxiety. So, maybe our community only has a couple 100,000, but you're not alone. There's 289 million of you out there. And we're all feeling that shame of wanting to come through for our friend and show up at the event. It's not that we don't want to do it. Nobody is less happy about, the anxiety symptoms than the person who's having the anxiety symptoms. They're not fun.
Exactly.
But, so I just wanted to say, that you are not alone. Mm-hmm. You are not the only one in the room with anxiety. And you can learn to live well with your anxiety.
Yes. And I love that you say that, hopeful, connected, and happy.
Mm-hmm.
And with the truth that you're probably going to disappoint some people.
Oh, definitely.
And that's okay too.
Definitely.
Right? And I think that's another thing in our society. We're not okay with disappointing people. Mm. It's like, for me, it's really, really difficult when I have to disappoint somebody.
Particularly as women.
Especially as women.
Particularly as women, it's like, that is just not okay to disappoint people,
I always say I don't metabolize disappointment well. When I don't. It's like, it just sits like right up here somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you. I want to just ask you last, how can people become part of the Anxiety Sisters? when they want to? How does that work?
They can come to our website, anxietysisters.com. If you give us an email address, then we will put you on our newsletter, monthly newsletter. It's not really monthly. It's like, 3 weeks, 6 weeks.
Monthly-ish.
We're kind of, it's an issue kind of. It's not a regular thing. And also, we will send you a progressive muscle relaxation download that you can listen to. Just helps start easing that anxiety right away. It's completely free. And then you have access to our panic button, which is me sitting with you and spending 6 or 7 minutes helping you get through an anxious moment. So that you know you're not alone, that you're sitting next to Abs, who's been there many, many, many times. So you can also find us on Facebook. We have the Anxiety Sisters Facebook page, and that community is the most warm, supportive, generous group of people I've ever seen on social media. There, and
we're also on Instagram, and we also have a podcast called The Spin Cycle with the Anxiety Sisters. So there's many ways in, however you feel most comfortable.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that they can find their way in just knowing that you're there.
Yeah.
And people may have anxiety.
If you can email us, absandmags@anxietysisters.com. You will get an email back from us, we promise. Oh, we've answered every email we've ever gotten.
Thank you. And then on Instagram, you are the Anxiety Sisters.
Anxiety Sisters.
Yes. I follow you.
We follow you too.
Oh, good. We're mutual. There's got to be a name for that. There's some kind of it's like a match or something.
Mutual adoration society.
Yes. I and I'm definitely in full admiration of the two of you. Very grateful for everything that you've done and everything that you shared with us today. This has been amazing for me. Like I said, I actually, I'm not somebody who gets emotional a lot. I'm just not. Emotional meaning kind of, teary or feel things that are tender or sad. And while reading the book and talking to you two, I think just because of the connection to these different things and you making it so okay to have these discussions, to have this shared space, and how open you are about your own journeys with this. I just so appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Honey, is it okay if we want to be Honey in our next? I want to be Honey in my next one.
Absolutely,
Is that okay? Okay.
We're complete.
I don't own Hun or Honey.
No. I want to be that. I want to be Laura. I want to be Honey.
Honey.
And then Honey, is it okay if I have a bit of a crush on Hun now?
Oh, good. Yeah. I love that.
Is it all right?
I just sit here and make you guys smile. That'll be good.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
You guys are great.
I can't wait to listen tomorrow to your talk with Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for having us, Laura. This was one we were so excited about.
Yes.
We're huge fans of yours.
Yes, we are.
Such a great talk. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're the Anxiety Sisters.
And we are the only ones in the room explaining how to survive anxiety.